The CEO's dare hung in the air like a thunderclap. "If you can open this safe, I'll wed you." His smirk was ice. Her fingers trembled on the combination dial. But when the heavy door finally swung open, neither expected to find the yellowed photograph inside or how it would unravel both their lives. What document could reduce a powerful woman to tears? Why did a man who controlled billions keep this one secret locked away? The answer lies in a promise made decades earlier, in a time when love wasn't a game but a lifeline. The steel vault loomed in the corner of the office, its surface pocked with decades of microscopic scratches. The CEO kept his back to her as she approached it, his gaze fixed on the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. 30 years, he said. The brass combination dial stared up at her like a frozen eye. Her first turn produced a dry click. Each number felt deliberate, the mechanism resisting with the stubbornness of something that hadn't moved in years. Corporate legends claimed previous assistants had wept trying to crack it. Some said there wasn't even anything inside, that the challenge itself was the point. Neuroscience would later explain the tremor in her fingers. When survival instincts meet calculated risk, the body floods with contradictory signals. Her pulse pounded, yet her breathing stayed measured. The CEO finally turned from the window, his polished shoes silent on the marble. Click. The second number aligned. The air smelled of leather and espresso, but underneath, something metallic. The safe's interior mechanisms groaned like an old hinge forced to work again. The CEO's cufflinks flashed as he folded his arms. Then came the third turn. The sound wasn't the sharp ping of success, but a deeper grind. The door resisted, then gave with a sigh. The frigid air that escaped smelled like old paper and mothballs. "Impossible," the CEO murmured. His reflection warped in the safe's steel surface, lips parted, forehead creased. Inside lay a single envelope, yellowed at the edges, unstamped, the kind people used before email. Fingers numb, she reached in. The paper crackled at her touch. The CEO moved closer now, his shadow falling across the open vault. His aftershave couldn't mask the sweat blooming at his temples. The envelope wasn't sealed. Its flap lifted with the barest pressure, yielding what looked like a photograph. Her grip faltered when she saw the woman's face. Not a stranger, someone whose features she saw daily in her own bathroom mirror. But younger, happy in a way the framed photos at home never showed. The CEO made a sound low in his throat. Not a word, not a gasp. The noise of a man struck somewhere vital. His polished facade cracked as surely as the safe's seal had broken. His next words would change everything, but first, silence. Thick, heavy, the kind that rewrites histories. The photograph trembled in her hands. The edges curled slightly, brittle with age. A young couple leaned against a car's hood, some classic American model, chrome gleaming behind them. The woman's smile showed teeth, unguarded in a way modern corporate portraits never allowed. Her sundress fluttered at the hem. The man's arm around her waist looked protective, not possessive. The CEO's breathing changed. His fingers, usually so precise with pens and contracts, hovered near the photo but didn't touch. His cufflinks caught, the light as his hands shook. The whites of his eyes grew visible all around the irises. She knew that smile, the particular tilt of the head, the way the woman's left dimple appeared deeper than the right. Her mother's college portrait still sat on the hallway table at home. But this was different. Alive in a way framed photos never captured. The office, blurred at the edges. A wave of something hot rose from her stomach. Later she'd read about vasovagal reactions, how shocking personal revelations can drop blood pressure, make vision tunnel. Right then, she only knew the mahogany desk seemed to tip sideways. The CEO's voice, when it came, sounded underwater. Loved her. 3 syllables. 30 years of weight behind them. The air between them changed, not thicker, thinner, like the atmosphere before lightning strikes. His confession hung suspended, rotating slowly for examination. The kind of statement that rewires everything in its path. Psychologists call this moment narrative rupture. When a person's understanding of their own story fractures along hidden fault lines, the photo hadn't just revealed two strangers. It showed the road not taken for both of them. He reached for the picture with a banker's care. His thumb traced the edge where the woman's shoulder met the car's fender. The action was intimate in a way his boardroom handshakes never could be. His other hand rose to his own face, checking some long-repressed reaction. The scotch he'd sipped before her arrival still sat abandoned, ice melted into clouded water. Her voice, when she found it, emerged smaller than expected. This was before? The CEO, no, the man, nodded once. His throat worked soundlessly before words came. The summer she took that internship abroad. A pause. The summer before. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. She understood now why the safe had stayed locked. Not to guard valuables, but pain. The kind that morphs over decades into something too dense to carry, too heavy to discard. His smirk from earlier had been armor. This, the vulnerable flesh beneath. The picture wasn't just proof of a romance. It was evidence of the CEO's capacity for tenderness, something business journalists routinely claimed he lacked. His fingers left the photo reluctantly, as if breaking contact might erase the memory itself. Out the window, the city continued uninterrupted. Traffic flowed. Lights blinked in neighboring skyscrapers. The ordinary world persisted, unaware that two people's histories had just rerouted entirely. The safe door hung open, its shadow stretching across the Persian rug, a mouth still gaping from its long silence. Underneath the photo, something else lay folded, yellowed paper, the kind used for handwritten letters before inboxes replaced stationery. The CEO's breath hitched when he saw it. A different kind of vulnerability now, not nostalgia, but dread. She knew without unfolding it that this letter wouldn't contain the neat excuses adults give children. This would be raw, undiluted truth, the sort that leaves marks. A tremor ran through his shoulders as he reached for the paper, not the controlled movements of a man who dominated markets, but the hesitant motion of someone stepping into cold water. His cufflink caught on the edge as he lifted it, the sound absurdly loud in the silent office. Then, the letter. One slow unfold, then another. And with it, the beginning of the end, not of their story, but the lies that had sustained them. The letter's creases had been folded and refolded, the paper thin along those lines. Blue ink peeked through where time had not quite faded the words completely. The handwriting looped and slanted, the kind of script from another era before keyboards replaced pens. The date in the upper corner was 32 years old to the day. She lifted the page with both hands, letting it hover rather than rest against her palms. The first line made her stomach drop. If I don't make it back, promise you'll look after our daughter. Below that, hidden between formal phrases, were words not meant for her eyes. The happiest months of my life and no regrets, written in a tight hand that suggested the writer had hesitated midway. The CEO's hand covered his mouth now, the leather of his chair creaking as he shifted. He stared at his own desktop blotter instead of the letter. His other hand tapped once against the chair arm, the rhythm nervous, uncalculated. Fragments became sentences as her eyes tracked downward. Medical terms she didn't recognize. A name, her, mother's, followed by numbers that must have been test results. The final paragraph contained instructions so precise they chilled. Bank account numbers, percentages of ownership, educational trust funds. Cold provisions for a child who would grow up without answers. Sign it, the letter finished. Not for me, for her. The silence afterward was physical, a weight pressing against eardrums. The photograph suddenly made sense. Not a keepsake, but a blueprint for a life that never got built. The CEO hadn't just known her mother. He'd promised her something impossible. His voice, when it came, ground like gravel. I didn't know how to. He waved at the room, the building beyond it. All this, I thought. Her vision swam. Every late night at the office, every impossible standard he'd set. His infamous refusal to promote her until she'd proven herself. It hadn't been professional rigor. It had been a fortress built to keep her out, or maybe to hold himself in. Research on complicated grief would later explain the pattern. Survivors who couldn't process loss sometimes recreated it through isolation. Guards became walls. Protection became distance. The CEO tried again. When your mother, he swallowed the rest. Up close, he looked nothing like corporate profiles suggested. Tiny broken blood vessels near his temples. Decades-old scar on his chin she'd never noticed before. The human details cameras always missed. She smoothed the letter against her thigh, watching her own fingers tremble. You couldn't just tell me? His breath left him in one long exhale. After a while, the lie became too big to undo. The confession sat there, exposed. He picked up the photograph, his thumb tracing the edge again. And then today, He cut himself off with a shake of his head. The office seemed smaller now. Promotional awards that had once looked impressive now seemed like cardboard cutouts. Every framed degree and financial report just stage dressing for a much lonelier performance. She thought of holidays spent alone in the office instead of traveling home. The way he'd always happened to schedule meetings whenever her birthday approached. Even now he didn't reach for her. Just the letter, the paper. The proof. The safe gaped open beside them, its shadow stretching long across the desk. They'd both built lives around its contents without ever knowing what lay inside. Secrets didn't age like wine in vaults. They congealed, thickened, became harder to swallow the longer they sat. The letter didn't even say his name in full, just an initial where a signature should have been. As though he'd known even then how impossible it would be to claim what the page demanded of him. A decade of performance reviews flashed through her mind. The brutal assessments, the impossible quotas, the way he'd made her fight for every inch of recognition while other executives strolled into promotions. All of it backed by ledger entries and account numbers from this single sheet of paper. You could have fired me, she said. Hired someone else to... His head lifted sharply at that. For the first time, she caught a glimpse of something behind. The polished exterior, something raw and stunned. I couldn't. He gestured to the letter like it might bite him. Not after promising this. The realization arrived like cold water. He hadn't ignored his promise, he'd fulfilled it in the most terrible way possible. By never letting her get close enough to disappoint or lose. By building an empire she'd have to earn piece by piece, because that was the only way he knew how, to care without collapsing. Clients always joked that the CEO ran his company like a fortress. They didn't know his real walls were built around grief instead of gold. Outside, the sky had darkened without either of them noticing. The city lights blinked on automatically, indifferent to revelations. The letter fluttered slightly in a draft, from the vent. He reached for it, hesitated, then let his hand drop. After tomorrow, if you'd prefer reassignment. She realized with a jolt that this was his version of an apology. The same way the safe had been his version of devotion. All these years, he'd communicated in vaults and barriers because plain words would have broken him. The letter wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the operating system behind every interaction they'd ever had. Every closed door, every unreasonable deadline, every time he'd watched just a second too long when she left the room. The wedding dare earlier that afternoon suddenly seemed laughable. Not a flirtation, but a dare to herself. One last test to see if she could finally crack the safe he'd built around himself. She folded the letter along its original creases, watching the ink lines disappear against each other. 30 years for a conversation that should have taken minutes. Don't, he said. No, begged, when she moved to put it back in the safe. The moment stretched. The photograph still lay between them, edges curling slightly in the conditioned air. His fingers twitched toward it, then away. She set the letter on the desk between them instead of in the vault. A choice. A bridge. His shoulders sagged, not with relief, something closer to exhaustion. I thought by now I'd know. You don't. She cut him off gently. Not yet. The glare of the computer screen caught the moisture in his eyes before he turned away. Outside, the first raindrops hit the windows with quiet insistence. The safe door still yawned open, its mechanisms finally quiet after decades of holding quiet. Neither of them moved to close it. The CEO's hand hovered between them for 3 full seconds before making contact. His fingers, always so precise, with a pen, shook as they brushed her wrist. He didn't grab, just rested his fingertips against her pulse point. Warm, terrifyingly human. I didn't know how to be a father. His voice broke on the last word. The confession sat between them, raw-edged and fragile. The office walls that had witnessed countless high-stakes negotiations now bore silent witness to something far more delicate. Clinical studies on reconciliation would later confirm what they discovered in that moment. The human brain processes emotional vulnerability as physical risk, triggering the same adrenaline response as standing at a great height. She studied the lines of his face, the faint scars around his eyes from decades of squinting at contracts, the way his jaw clenched when he wasn't speaking. The man who'd terrified junior executives with a single raised eyebrow now looked at her with something resembling fear. Not of her. For her. The safe loomed open behind them, its interior dark. The photograph still lay on the desk, curled slightly, at the corners like it was trying to fold back into itself. Earlier that afternoon he'd issued the challenge with a smirk, treating it like another corporate power play. Now everything, the office, the skyline through the windows, even the scent of his cologne, felt different, rearranged. I can learn. 3 words. A full stop where there had only ever been conditional clauses in their relationship before. His thumb moved against her wrist. Not a caress, just confirmation she hadn't pulled away. Somewhere in the building, an elevator dinged. Phones rang at reception. Life continued. But the room they stood in might as well have been encased in glass. Developmental psychologists call this liminal space. The moment after old roles collapse but before new ones form. She thought only of how small his wedding band looked against his knuckles. She turned her hand palm up beneath his. His skin was dry, calloused near the thumb from years of fountain pen use. Not the smooth hands of a figurehead CEO, but working. Hands that still remembered other textures. The rain outside streaked the windows, turning the city lights into smeared watercolors. You keep trying to fix things with money, she said. The observation landed softly. No edge, just fact. His shoulders, tensed, not denial but recognition. The letter had specified bank accounts, trusts, dividends. Not one word about bedtime stories or parent-teacher conferences. He'd written checks instead of letters, built an empire instead of a home. He swallowed hard, his throat working beneath the perfectly knotted tie. Start smaller, she suggested. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Not the polished corporate tone she used in presentations, but something rougher. Younger. The version that had waited years for a birthday card that never came. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Some offices would have switched to LEDs by now, but this building clung to its older fixtures. The glow tinged everything slightly blue. His grip tightened, not enough to hurt, just enough to feel real. Across the desk, his briefcase gaped open. Inside, a stack of unsigned contracts peeked out. He followed her gaze. I was going to... He stopped himself. There were a dozen ways to finish that sentence, all of them involving money, power, the usual currencies he traded in. None of them fit anymore. She waited. He exhaled through his nose. The scent of his aftershave, something citrus-based, expensive, mixed, with the old paper smell from the safe. Dinner, he said finally. Tonight. If you're... The hesitation cost him. His eyebrows drew together like he was calculating some complex equation. The corners of her mouth lifted despite herself. Watching the man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers flounder over restaurant reservations should have felt strange. It didn't. Italian, she suggested. The place by the florist you always bypass. His breath caught. She'd noticed then. All Those times he'd taken the long way around the block just to avoid passing the shop where her mother once worked weekends. The realization seemed to physically pain him. His fingers spasmed around hers. That was the thing about vaults. They protected what mattered by keeping everything else out, including light, including air. The man who'd built literal fortresses around his heart now stood exposed, blinking in sunlight he hadn't felt in decades. The framed degrees on the walls, the stock ticker silently scrolling on his computer monitor. None of it meant what it had an hour ago. The world outside continued turning, indifferent to seismic shifts in private offices. His cufflink glinted as he reached with his free hand to straighten the photograph. Not a business gesture, something gentler. She covered his fingers with hers before he could pull away. His knuckles felt cool beneath her palm. The rain picked up outside, drumming against the windows with new insistence. Neither of them moved to close them. He met her eyes properly for the first time since the safe opened. The same color as hers. She'd always resented that. Now the recognition sat differently between them. Not appropriation, but inheritance. His lips parted as if to speak. She shook her head. No more plans. No more contracts. Just this. The hum of the HVAC. The weight of his hand in hers. The photograph that proved they'd both existed in someone else's happiness once. His phone buzzed against the desk. The screen lit up with some urgent notification. He didn't glance at it. Didn't even flinch. The CEO who'd once taken calls during funerals let it ring. The wedding would come later, if at all. First came the harder work. Learning to speak in something other than spreadsheets and vault combinations. His thumb rubbed absently across the back of her hand, tracing invisible patterns. Not a proposal. Not even close. Just a beginning. The safe yawned behind them, its door still thrown wide. He finally released her hand, not to pull away, but to shut it. The heavy clang of metal meeting metal reverberated through the office. A definitive sound. Not locked again. Just closed. His cufflink snagged on the dial as he withdrew. The tiny accident made him seem suddenly mortal. He stared at the safe for a long moment, shoulders rising and falling with steady breaths. When he turned back, his eyes were red-rimmed but clear. 7 o'clock, he said. Voice rough but not unkind. He stopped, visibly rewording whatever corporate phrasing had sprung to mind first. I'll be waiting outside. Small steps. But the first steps away from a vault are always the hardest. She nodded. The rain eased as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the glass streaked but transparent again. Through it, the city lights flickered. Not stars, but close enough for now. He exhaled something that wasn't quite a laugh, more like relief. The office hummed quietly around them, unchanged but suddenly full of possibility. The photograph still lay between them, edges curling slightly. He didn't put it back in the safe, just left it there face up where they both could see it, where it belonged. The safe had guarded more than documents. It held 30 years of unmourned grief. The CEO's wedding dare wasn't a proposal, but a test of who might finally breach his defenses. Behind steel walls, the photograph survived untouched, preserving younger versions of them both. Walls work both ways. The vault protected its contents but also imprisoned the man who kept it locked. Every turn of the dial had been a step toward this reckoning. Courage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just turning the first number. Listening for the faint click, trusting the mechanism will respond when the right combination aligns.